Lie to Deep greets my dear friends. Everyone knows that love is an invisible force. It can change everything, will make us overcome all. Today, the story we bring to you is a vivid proof of this. It is the story of Deep and James. A touching story full of emotions. From sorrow to happiness, from despair to hope. Before facing a serious illness, James proposed to Deep in a romantic moment. But she worried about her health. Turned him down. However, James didn't give up. He decided to take to Deep abroad for treatment. Only out of love, but also with faith in the power of life and sincere affection. After a long period of hardship, Deep overcame her illness, and in that moment, she accepted James' proposal, marking a milestone in their love, resilience, and hope. Their story is not just a journey of love, but also a story of sacrifice, of challenges that we all may face in life. If this story touched you, remember to subscribe to our channel to follow more meaningful and inspiring stories. Don't forget to like and share, so that your loved ones can also experience the warmth of love. Thank you for watching and supporting our channel. James couldn't stop worrying as he watched Deep grow weaker every day. Every time he looked at her, his heart ached, tightening with each passing moment. The girl he loved was slowly becoming a mere shadow of herself. Her body had become frail, her face hollowed from the illness, and her skin had turned pale. Every time he saw her in pain, his heart broke. James felt powerless, unable to do anything to ease her suffering. Deep was battling the deadly disease alone. Though she always tried to hide her pain, she didn't want him to see her suffering. She put on a smile every time he looked at her, even though Deep inside, she was being torn apart by unrelenting pain. But James, he ever perceptive, could see the changes in her, even if she tried to mask them. He noticed how much weight she had lost, how her skin looked unhealthy, how her eyes always appeared tired and lifeless. He knew, although she didn't say it, that the pain and fear of her illness consumed her every waking moment. Deep had always been strong, full of life, always laughing and brimming with energy. But now, all that remained were bouts of pain, tired eyes, and a face that reflected the toll of her illness. It hurt James to watch her fight this battle alone. She tried to convince him that she was fine, that she could handle it, but he saw through the facade. He knew that something was terribly wrong. When the doctor informed him that Deep's condition was not improving, James was overwhelmed by despair. He couldn't bear to see the girl he loved fighting this illness without any progress. The feeling of helplessness weighed on him, as though everything was slipping through his fingers. Every moment that passed, he feared that it might be too late to do something. If he didn't act now, would there be any chance for her to survive? He asked himself this, and the answer was always the same: no. He knew the only way to save Deep was to take her abroad, to seek the best doctors and the most advanced treatments. Despite the high costs and the immense challenges that lay ahead, he couldn't just watch her slip away without doing everything in his power to help her. One evening, when he saw Deep struggling to eat a simple dinner, James couldn't take it any longer. He had made up his mind. He walked up to her, his gaze serious, yet filled with love. "You can't keep going like this to Deep. I can't leave you alone. I'll take you abroad, find the best doctors, and get the best treatment you need to get better. We can't give up." Deep looked at him, surprise and concern filling her eyes. She understood how much this would mean for him, and her heart ached at the thought of what he would have to sacrifice. James the First. "I don't want you to suffer because of me. You could have a much easier life if you weren't worrying about me. You deserve a peaceful life. I don't want to be a burden to you." She couldn't bear the thought of him sacrificing everything for her. She didn't want him to live in constant fear and worry for her well-being. However, James remained resolute. He took her hand in his, holding it tightly, and kissed her forehead gently. His voice was firm yet full of compassion. "You don't need to worry about me. I've already made up my mind. I love you to Deep, and I'll do whatever it takes to save you. We'll get through this together. I can't live without you." Deep sat silently, her eyes filled with tears. Deep Dow, she knew that his love for her was unconditional, but at the same time it made her feel guilty. She didn't want to be the cause of his suffering. But in her heart, she also realized that James's love for her was a strength, not a burden. And so, despite her fears, she made a decision. "I don't want you to suffer, but I can't leave you either. If you've decided this, then I'll go with you." James smiled with relief, knowing that she had finally agreed. He immediately began planning the trip to take her abroad for treatment. He contacted the top medical specialists overseas, ranging everything from medical records to visas and flight details. Each day, he monitored her condition closely, ever leaving her side for even a moment. The day they boarded the plane, James felt a heavy weight in his chest. He looked at Deep's weary face, knowing that this wasn't just a trip for medical treatment. It was a journey they both had to undertake together. Throughout the long flight, James constantly reassured Deep, keeping her hope alive. He reminded her that they weren't alone, and no matter what happened, he would always be there by her side. When the plane finally touched down in the foreign country, James's anxiety didn't subside. But he knew that this was just the first step in a long and difficult journey. No matter how painful or challenging it would be, he believed that if they faced it together, their love would be strong enough to overcome it all. "We won't give up, my love," he whispered, and in Deep's eyes he saw a flicker of hope. Before James decided to take Deep abroad for treatment, there was an unforgettable moment that she couldn't get out of her mind. It was the day he proposed to her in the hospital, where everything felt darker and heavier than ever. Deep lay on the hospital bed, her body frail, suffering from the constant pain. But still, Deep Dow She couldn't shake the fear of what their future might look like. She knew she wasn't healthy, and every night she fought the disease. Everything seemed to turn dark and uncertain. One afternoon, when the soft light filtered into the hospital room, James walked in holding a small box. He had always been by her side, every day, every hour, ever once leaving her. Despite being exhausted and stressed, he remained strong and steady beside her, like a rock she could lean on. Tadeep looked at him with tear-filled eyes, feeling the love and sacrifice he had shown her. But deep inside she couldn't shake off the worry. Can he really bear a life with a sick wife like me? James sat down beside the bed, nervously opening the small box. Inside was a sparkling ring. His eyes were filled with determination and intense love, as if everything he had been through over the past time was just to be with her, to take care of her. Tadeep, will you marry me? His voice was warm but also tinged with sadness, as though he wanted her to see the sincerity in his words. Even if you suffer, even if you have to fight this disease, I will always be here with you. With a loving gaze, James gently held her hand, his eyes never leaving hers. He wasn't afraid of the exhaustion or the disease that was slowly eating away at her. To him, as long as he had her, everything else seemed insignificant. But it was because of that intense love that Tadeep felt even more uneasy than ever before. She loved him so much, but her health situation made it impossible for her to accept his proposal. She didn't want him to live a life filled with anxiety, a life of uncertainty and pain. She understood that if they got married, it wouldn't just be about happiness. It would be a journey filled with challenges, a life she couldn't predict. Even though their love was powerful, she couldn't bear the heavy price James would have to pay. I love you, but I can't, she whispered, her voice full of pain. I don't want you to live in fear and worry because of me. I don't want you to go through all the suffering that I will. You deserve a better life. Tadeep's words echoed in the hospital room, and James couldn't hide the pain in his eyes. He loved her with all his heart, but he also understood that she was worried for him, afraid that he would sacrifice too much for her. Tadeep's concerns pierced his heart like a knife, but he couldn't leave her. James gently wiped away her tears. Tadeep, I don't need an easy life. I just need you. If I can be by your side, if I can take care of you every day, that's the greatest happiness to me, James said, his voice steady and firm. He didn't let her say anything more, gently holding her hand, as if to say that no matter what happens, he would always be there for her, ever leaving. But even though James' words were sincere and warm, Tadeep's heart was still conflicted. She loved him so much, and was ready to sacrifice everything so that he could be happy, but she couldn't accept the idea of him living a life full of anxiety and suffering forever. She couldn't bear the thought that she would be a burden to him. I don't want you to suffer because of me, she whispered, her eyes full of unspeakable sadness. James quietly sat beside her bed, not saying anything more, just gently holding her hand. After a long silence, he stood up and kissed her forehead softly. I love you, Tadeep. And even if you refuse, I will always be here. Always love you, and will take care of you for the rest of my life. At that moment, everything seemed to melt into Tadeep's heart. She knew she couldn't refuse forever, that she couldn't live in fear and worry all the time. And it was James' love that helped her realize that, no matter how difficult it was, they would face everything together. After James left the hospital room, Tadeep remained sitting there, her cold hands tightly clutching the hem of her shirt, her gaze blankly staring out the window. A wave of pain washed over her soul, but there was also an odd sense of peace. James' words echoed in her heart, like a confirmation that he would never leave her, no matter how bad things got. Yet the worry still wouldn't fade. She loved him, but she didn't want him to bear this suffering. In the days that followed, she tried to avoid deep conversations with James, tried not to meet his eyes, because she feared she wouldn't be able to refuse him. A guy. She feared that she would hurt him once more, that her love would become a bird he would have to carry for the rest of his life. But no matter what, her love for him remained intense. Even in those brief moments, she could feel her heart beat faster whenever he was near. One afternoon, as the sunset began to cast its golden hues over the sea, James appeared beside her like a familiar figure. He didn't say anything, just sat down next to her. The two of them remained silent, only the sound of waves gently lapping at the shore, and the cool breeze brushing against them. Tadeep felt the warmth of his presence, his steadfast gaze, and the deep love he had for her. The world around them seemed to stop, leaving only the sound of the waves and the peace that love brought. "Do you remember the first time we came here together?" James spoke softly, his voice warm and gentle. "OT rushed, not forced. Back then you were healthy, and we laughed. Watched the sunset together. I just wish everything could go back to how it was." Tadeep turned to look at him, her eyes misty. "I remember," she whispered. "I remember so much. Then let me start over." Tadeep. James said, his hands tightly holding hers. His eyes locked on hers, with all the love and determination in them. "I won't let you be alone anymore. No matter what happens. You don't have to bear everything on your own. I will be here to care for you, to love you, until we overcome all the challenges together." They stared at each other in silence, both feeling the deep love and sacrifice James had for her. His words were not just promises. They were a strong commitment that he could never take back. In the gentle glow of the sunset, Tadeep felt her heart bloom. She no longer feared, no longer worried about what could happen. No matter how illness clung to her, no matter how difficult life became, James would always be there by her side, ever leaving her. At that moment, James gently knelt before Tadeep, his eyes filled with love and hope. He took her hand in his, and in the warm light of the sunset, his voice trembled with emotion as he said, "Deep, you will be my wife. I will do everything to take care of you, no matter what happens. I love you, and I will always be here with you, facing every challenge, never abandoning you." Deep looked at him, her heart tightening. All feelings of guilt and worry melted away. She could feel the sincerity and boundless love in his gaze. James didn't love her for what she had, but for what she was enduring. He loved her not because she was perfect, but because she was Deep, the one he would always love and protect for life. With tears in her eyes, Deep sighed softly and gazed at him for a long time, as if wanting to etch this moment in her heart forever. She knew that she could not refuse him any longer. She could not let him endure loneliness and worry anymore. She would accept his love and walk with him through this challenging road. "I will be your wife," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. She no longer felt afraid, no longer felt like a bird. This time she was ready to embrace his love, to let him care for and love her forever. From that moment on, they both knew that, no matter how many challenges life threw their way, their love would remain steadfast and unbreakable. They would face every difficulty together, because true love was the only strength that could help them overcome it all. Even if illness brought them pain, they would fight it together, knowing that love would be the light, guiding their path ahead. The story of Deep and James truly touched me deeply. The love in this story is not just about romance, but also about sacrifice, patience, and believing in a better future. When James proposed to Deep, she turned him down because she was worried about her health, a decision that wasn't easy. However, James didn't give up. He wholeheartedly took Deep abroad for treatment. Not only out of love, but also because he believed in the power of affection and hope. When Deep recovered and accepted James' proposal, it was truly a special moment, a testament to the power of love and resilience. They overcame challenges that seemed impossible, and that makes me believe that true love can conquer all. This story is not just a reminder of the strength of love, but also a lesson about sacrifice and faith, and the good things in life. It makes me realize that, even in difficult circumstances, if we have enough faith and love, everything can change. Do you believe that? Thank you for following the story.